the gender budget, Justin Trudeau's gender budget. You'll remember this is the budget that increased taxes on Canadians, put Canadians into a lot of debt, didn't do much to improve the lives of Canadians, in fact, nothing at all. And he also said that this was a budget that was good for women. In fact, it was such a gender budget that he subjected everything that was in the budget to a gender-based analysis. So Finance Minister Bill Morneau decided to go to the Status of Women Committee yesterday here in Ottawa and talk about his gender budget. So I want you to watch what happens when I ask him if he had gender budgeted his way to equality and fairness for women with the carbon tax. Watch what happens when I ask him if the carbon tax is sexist.
Madam Chair, I do need to leave as close to 5 o'clock as possible. I have something else that starts at 5 o'clock.
I'm sure you want to stick around for me, Minister. Okay, great. What is the relative cost burden of your carbon tax for women as compared to men?
Sorry, I didn't hear the beginning of your question.
What is the relative cost burden of your carbon tax for women as compared to men?
As you likely know, we believe that for our economy to be successful over the long term, we need to make sure that we're considering also the environmental challenges.
Since you've got to leave, I'll just ask, has a gender-based analysis been completed for the carbon tax?
Again, where I was getting to is that we believe a carbon pricing approach is important, and we've also said that we need to find a way to move that revenue back to the provinces.
So has a gender-based analysis been completed for the carbon tax?
As a revenue-neutral measure, you'll understand that we see this as something that's important for the long-term health of our environment and our economy.
So has a gender-based analysis been completed for the carbon tax?
And as I mentioned, this is a revenue-neutral measure that we see will help our environment over the long term and enable our economy to be successful.
You know, you've talked about the wage gap and these different things. Did you do any modeling? Is the price elasticity of the consumption of carbon the same for women as it is for men in Canada?
As I've said, we believe that carbon pricing is important. We also believe that this
page 219 of the budget
approach
you've also said on page 219
to do it properly.
So you've also said on page 219 of the budget that you're putting in place a gender results framework, which is a whole of government tool. So has that tool not been applied to the carbon tax?
And again, I'll repeat, in putting in place carbon pricing, we know it'll have a long-term positive impact on the environment.
So it has been done.
For everyone. And it will have an impact, of course, that from the federal government standpoint is revenue neutral.
Could you table the gender-based analysis for the carbon tax with this committee?
I'll just repeat again.
So it hasn't been done?
I will repeat again that carbon pricing from the federal government standpoint is a revenue neutral measure that will, over the long term, encourage behaviours that will help the environment for all Canadians.
You can table the gender-based analysis for the carbon tax with this committee?
What I will tell you is that the approach that we've taken is one that will enable all Canadians to be...
I'll take that as a code for no, and I'll take that as code for it hasn't been done. So my question is, if there's a whole of government approach to gender-based analysis, and you're imposing a brand new tax on all Canadians, and we know that there's a pay equity gap for women, and many women bear a disproportionate cost of childcare, why would you not do a gender-based analysis for the carbon tax?
As I've said, we recognize that the way to get to behaviours that are going to ensure that we properly consider environmental impact over time. Would you say that the carbon tax
is sexist? Well, would you? I mean, has there been a gender-based analysis? I'm just wondering.
As I've mentioned, we put in place the carbon pricing approach in order to deal with the long-term environmental impacts of carbon.
So if you've done no gender-based analysis for it, and we know that women bear the disproportionate cost of childcare and things like driving kids around and paying for transport and food, I would beg to argue that the carbon tax is sexist. Do you have any evidence to prove otherwise with your gender budget?
As I've said, the federal carbon pricing is one that's revenue neutral from the federal government.
So
it's
how
one
can
that
it be
will drive
revenue neutral for
behaviors.
women if you haven't done a gender budget for it?
I can just tell you that we've put in place a measure that will allow us to return those revenues to the province.
So you are saying you're actively pursuing a sexist carbon tax?
Well, no, I'm not.
So then why haven't you done a gender-based analysis for it?
I can just repeat what I've said, and that is, of course, that we've put in place carbon pricing that will enable us to have a long-term positive environmental impact.
I know there's a lot of moms that are filling up their cars right now at like $1.70 a tank, and they're going, this doesn't seem like it's gender-based. So will you commit to doing a gender-based analysis of the carbon tax?
10 seconds, Minister.
We will commit to continuing with an approach that will allow us to price what we don't want, which
Code
is
for
pollution.
no.
And that will help us with the environment in the long term.
Wasn't that special? Now, there's a reason why he danced around all of those questions. Financial Post this morning actually featured this exchange between him and I and pointed out that a request for information that our MPs put in about whether or not the government had done a gender-based analysis on the carbon tax actually showed that there was a disproportionate impact on women. So in fact, you can say with confidence that it is a sexist carbon tax, as any woman who is filling up her gas tank today at $1.70 a litre would know. Any Canadian person would know that the carbon tax has a big negative impact on Canadians. Not that these Liberal cabinet ministers would know, given that most of them have drivers here in Ottawa and get to jet around the world to fancy climate change conferences where the big outcome is cocktails and tables that are covered in grass. So I decided to take one of those fancy jet setters to task this morning, and I asked Catherine McKenna, a strong female MP, why she would support a sexist carbon tax. Watch what happened.
Speaker, we know that the Parliamentary Budget Officer said that the cost of the carbon tax to the Canadian economy would be $10 billion. We know that the Liberals are hiding the cost of the carbon tax to Canadians because they know it won't reduce greenhouse gas emissions and meet their targets. It's just a cash grab. However, we know, based on the Finance Minister's testimony at committee yesterday, that not only are the Liberals covering up the full cost of the carbon tax, they're covering up the fact that it's a sexist carbon tax. Given that there's a gender pay gap and the disproportionate burden of childcare expenses that women bear, not that the minister would know, because I don't think she's had to fill up her car here because she has a driver, this tax will have a disproportionate negative effect on women. As any woman who's filling up her van before she drove her kids to school today at $1.70 a litre in BC would know. I just have a very simple question for the minister. Why is the Prime Minister gender budgeting his way to making life harder for Canadian women with this sexist carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Speaker, I was very happy to drive my children to their activities yesterday. Canadians understand that climate change is real, that we need to take action, that we need to take smart, practical action to tackle climate change, as much as for women and for men. And we know that women face the disproportionate impacts of climate change. We see that in across the world, where women are often the ones on the front lines of devastating incidents. We will always stand for women. We understand that we need to always look at the impacts of any policy that we put in place. And that's why, when it comes to carbon pricing, provinces have the ability to take the revenues and return them in the way that they see fit. They can do that as tax cuts. They can do that in investments in public transportation. We know women are more likely to be single moms, and they are taking public transportation. Right. They can make investments in clean innovation. We want to see women entrepreneurs succeed in the clean growth century. And as a mom, I know that we need to take action on climate change. The question I have is, what is the party's opposite plan to tackle climate change?
So there you have it. A sexist carbon tax produced by a feminist minister in a gender-based budget. Brought to you on behalf of the Liberal Party of Canada. In all seriousness, this carbon tax affects all Canadians. It's ridiculous. The gas price crisis that we're seeing this week is bananas. And for what? It's a cash grab. that's frankly turning away investment in this country. It's making lives more difficult for you, and I'm very proud to fight it because it's not going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's just going to make your life more difficult. So, Canadian women, sexist carbon tax, brought to you by Justin Trudeau. I'll keep fighting for you, working hard for you in Ottawa. Have a great day.